So, what happens when a spiritual master gets called a fraud, right to his face? You might expect an argument, right? Or for him to get angry. But no. Instead, he tells one of the most incredible stories of self-discovery you'll ever hear. Today, we're going to dive right into the Buddha's own telling of his epic quest for enlightenment. Okay, so our story actually kicks off not with the Buddha himself, but with, let's call him his number one critic. We've got this super smart young Brahmin student named Saṅgārava, who hears people praising the Buddha and just scoffs. He completely dismisses him. And this moment of skepticism, it's what sets the entire stage for this remarkable confrontation, where the Buddha literally uses his own life story as the ultimate comeback. So who is this skeptic? Well, his name is Saṅgārava, and he's a master of the sacred Vedas, a real intellectual heavyweight of his time. And in his eyes, the Buddha is just a shaveling ascetic, basically a nobody. He's absolutely convinced he has nothing to learn from this guy. But then a devout follower, a woman named Dhamma, steps in and challenges him directly. She basically tells him, hey, you have no idea what you're talking about. Oof. And, being called out like that, it gets to him. So Saṅgārava, feeling a bit stung, decides he's going to go and confront this so-called enlightened one himself. And just like that, our story is set in motion. All right, so when Saṅgārava finally gets his face-to-face with the Buddha and asks him what's so special about his path, the Buddha starts telling his own story. And it begins way back when he was a young man, when he walked away from a life of total luxury because he was searching for a truth that went way beyond what even the greatest teachers of his time knew. So this young seeker, who he now call the Bodhisattva, or the Buddha-to-be, he goes out and finds the two most famous spiritual teachers in all of India. And get this, with lightning speed, he masters everything they have to teach. We're talking about these incredibly deep meditative states, things like the dimension of nothingness, and the even wilder dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. I mean, he reached the absolute top of what these guys could offer. But here's where things get really interesting. Even though his own teachers were like, wow, you're our equal now, he knew deep down that something was missing. He realized these super peaceful states were great, but they were temporary. They weren't the final answer. They didn't lead to that true, unshakable freedom he was looking for, to nibbana. So he knew he had to keep going. So after respectfully parting ways with these great masters, the Bodhisattva decides, okay, I have to figure this out completely on my own. And this leads him down a path that a lot of ascetics back then thought was the only way to liberation. Basically, conquering your body and mind through extreme, and I mean extreme self-punishment. Now, before he even started this intense journey, he had this huge insight, and it came to him as this really powerful image. He realized that a mind that's still all tangled up in worldly cravings and desires, it's like a piece of wet wood that's been soaked in water. You can try to light it all you want, but you're just going to wear yourself out. The fire of wisdom, it just can't catch. And here's the flip side of that. He realized a mind that's free from all that craving, one that's peaceful inside, well, that's like a dry piece of wood sitting on dry land. It's totally ready. It's just waiting for that spark of insight to burst into the full fire of awakening. That was the state he knew he had to get to. And for 6 long years, he put this to the ultimate test. I mean, the stuff he did was just unimaginable. He would clench his teeth and press his tongue to the roof of his mouth to try and crush his own thoughts. He'd hold his breath until he felt these splitting pains in his head, and he slowly starved himself until he was eating nothing more than a few drops of bean soup a day. He literally pushed his body to the absolute brink of death. And these are his own words describing what happened to him. It's pretty horrifying. He said, "My spine became like a string of beads. My ribs like the rafters of a dilapidated shed. When I touched my stomach, I took hold of my spine." Just imagine that. After all of that, after reaching the absolute limit of what a human can endure, he had a massive realization. This path of extreme pain was a total dead end. It wasn't bringing him closer to enlightenment, it was just bringing him closer to death. Okay, so here he is, at his absolute lowest point. He's collapsed, he's basically about to die from starvation, and then something shifts. It wasn't some new philosophy or a grand vision. It was just a simple, almost forgotten memory from when he was a kid. He remembered being a little boy, just sitting peacefully under a rose apple tree while his dad was working. And with no effort at all, he just naturally slipped into this state of incredible meditative bliss, a state we call jhana. It was this feeling of deep, easy focus.
Really pleasant, but also completely wholesome, totally free from any kind of craving. And then a thought hit him like a lightning bolt. Wait a minute, could this be the path to awakening?
And this was a complete 180 in his thinking. He asked himself, why am I so afraid of a type of pleasure that has nothing to do with unwholesome stuff? He realized he didn't have to torture himself. I mean, a starved, weak body can't support a strong, clear mind, right? The true path wasn't about pain. It was about this balanced state of meditative clarity. This was the discovery of the middle way. So now that he'd found his new path, he accepted a simple meal of rice and milk. Of course, his 5 ascetic friends were horrified. They thought he'd given up, and they just left him. But he hadn't given up at all. He had just found the right way. So after regaining his strength, he sat down under a huge tree and made this legendary vow. He would not get up from that spot until he had found the final truth. Now, his enlightenment didn't happen in just one big flash. It actually unfolded in 3 clear stages over the course of the night. In the first part of the night, he gained the power to remember his own past lives, like countless of them. Then, in the second watch, he got what's called the divine eye, and he could see how all beings are reborn over and over again based on their actions, their karma. And then, finally, in the last part of the night, he turned his focus completely inward and just wiped out the deepest poisons of the mind, finally understanding the true nature of suffering and how to end. And as the sun came up, he had done it. He had reached his goal, Nibbana. And you know, it's not a place, it's not some kind of heaven, it's the complete extinguishing of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. He knew, with a certainty that could never be shaken, that for him, the cycle of suffering was over. Forever. And just like that, with the end of his story, the Buddha brings us right back to the present moment. Him sitting right across from the very man who called him a fraud, the young scholar Saṅgārava. You see, the whole life story wasn't just a tale, it was the answer. Saṅgārava was just completely blown away. Hearing this incredible journey, the learning from the masters, the insane asceticism, the profound breakthrough, all of that intellectual pride just melted away. He suddenly saw that the Buddha wasn't just teaching from some old book or making things up. He was teaching from direct, raw, hard-won experience. And so, the story comes full circle. The ultimate proof of the Buddhist teaching was the story of how he actually found it. The once proud skeptic, Saṅgārava, asks to be accepted as a follower because he found in the Buddha's life the very authenticity he was so sure wasn't there. So the Buddha's entire epic quest was this journey between the 2 extremes of total indulgence and brutal self-torture, all to find a balanced, powerful, and effective path. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to think about in our own lives, in our own struggles, whether it's with work or our health or our relationships. Where are we stuck in extremes? And what might a middle way look like for us?